So, welcome. This is a discussion on operational risk management within the open source sector. This talk draws on lessons learned by Collabora, an open source consultancy, but the principles apply broadly to other consultancies and organizations engaged in open source as well. So hopefully this will be valuable for anybody here involved. So I used to think risk management was about being in control. Then I started working in open source. I'm Eleni, Engineering Operations Manager at Collabora, and I find that working in open source is a bit like hosting a dinner party where half your guests are remote and no one really agrees on the menu, and somebody forks a recipe halfway through the meal, like live on GitHub. So it's a lovely chaos. In this session, we'll talk about how to turn that unpredictability into strength through adaptive frameworks, intentional planning, and a healthy dose of upstream diplomacy. So what I want you to take away from this session is a little bit of theory, some practical frameworks, and then also how can you apply that into your day-to-day. So let's look at why resilience matters in open source today. The open source ecosystem has become like a critical infrastructure. It's not just about community code, obviously, as we all know. It underpins also enterprise software and services. Now, this graphic presents a high-level overview, and I will get into more details as we proceed with the presentation. But to start off, we see about the first point of compliance alignment across supply chains. We face a lot of unpredictability every day in our jobs, in our lives. We see it in the market. So we have obviously geopolitical risk. We have AI dependencies. You hear all about that supply chain fragmentation. There's just so many areas where we're exposed. You name it. You've probably seen it in your own jobs as well. So organizations need compliance alignment across supply chains, flexibility also to adjust when upstream project shifts, and for example, maintainers leave, and also the ability to deliver predictably despite macroeconomic pressures. Then we also, of course, need to look at talent movement. It matters a lot. Consultancies must invest in people, do cross-training and succession planning to avoid over-reliance on individuals. If we look a little bit more closely at market volatility, without getting into too many details, you probably heard about it a lot in the recent talks. But we did get hit by the COVID shock, and it did impact consultancies and businesses worldwide a lot. We've seen in practice that project pipelines can contract and expand really quickly. I don't know how you've seen it in your business, but for us, the first COVID years, there was a sudden surge in demand, especially around multimedia streaming and these kind of services. But then very quickly, a few years later, we realized our clients are reacting very differently. Budgets can shrink, or they can have very urgent demands. Procurement is more difficult, so the whole market has changed significantly. So open source service firms such as Collabora and also other similar companies need to plan for unpredictable demand swings and be ready to pivot their talent pool quickly. And this is one of the main lessons that we've learned over the past few years. So, if we look more closely at the operational risk landscape in open source, I have identified 4 main risk domains. And we'll go into a bit more detail for each one. So we look at volatile client demand. As I mentioned, project scope, budget, and also priorities can change very quickly. It can be also mid-delivery that the client changes their minds, or that suddenly there's a funding change, or there's a very urgent need. Similarly, a commitment that has been made is canceled later on. So this has been very, very tricky to deal with. We have, of course, upstream dependencies and dependency shifts. Any developments within the upstream communities that we're working with can have, obviously, great benefit, but also a great risk as well, because you're depending on individuals and their contributions, and you never know what kind of direction a project might take. And we, of course, have distributed teams, which have, again, a lot of value, but when looking at risk, you need to look at operational risks around coordination, communication, cultural differences sometimes. It can slow down the decision-making process. Effective asynchronous work requires strong discipline in documentation, clear task handoffs, and self-management. Otherwise, misunderstandings or delays can occur. Just a quick show of hands, who thinks documentation is very important in open source? Yeah, great. Who likes to write it? There we go. So you see why it's one of the 4. Excellent. And yeah, one of the things also that's a bit challenging with distributed teams is spontaneous knowledge sharing and creative brainstorming can be a bit hindered, if you're not working face-to-face. So people need to be managed properly. It is our job as operations professionals to support art people the best way we can and set them up to succeed and empower them so they can be thriving at their job and continuously growing. Now let's drill down a little bit more into operational risk in open source. What is the source of it? What is the root behind it? We've already mentioned project volatility, so roadmaps can shift, maintainers can leave, or projects may be forked. You've seen that all before. We have an example, a practical example of the LibreOffice fork from OpenOffice, where, I don't know if you remember, it was OpenOffice was acquired by Sun Microsystems a while back, and then there was some governance concern, like is corporations such as Oracle going to follow, the same path that we wanted before? So the community actually stepped in to safeguard its future and, forked LibreOffice from that to get it to where we are now and to reduce that risk of a single enterprise, let's say, calling all the shots there. When we look at supply chain complexity, we have dependencies that can be unknown or poorly documented, and sometimes the licenses might be a bit unclear. For this, and of course, like legacy code, which you must be familiar as well, that can be sitting there for a while and not being updated, and you need to keep up. So for this reason, we have, of course, the software bill of materials and SPDX files that can help map and clarify these dependencies. One example of supply chain complexity is also the example of Elasticsearch. Just to very briefly outline that to you in 2021. They moved from Apache 2.0 to SSPL Elastic. They did a license shift. So from a permissive to a restrictive license. And that created huge risks for everybody who had adopted it because they would have to potentially release proprietary code if they were using it. So that's where also the community stepped in. It was forked, and then OpenSearch was launched. So this is, these are just examples of how the risks were identified and dealt with within open source. And for high-risk projects, we do have some delivery constraints, so changing client demands and macroeconomic shocks, like the pandemic we mentioned just before. They require consultancies to adapt resource planning and portfolio strategy. So you need to continuously stay up to date and be vigilant and reacting to the market and to what's happening. So how can we summarize that into some easily digestible principles for operational resilience in open source? Well, we start with continuous monitoring. You're familiar with that. Running CI tests upstream can give immediate warning if upstream change breaks compatibility. This is essentially a real-time risk detection. This is obviously not to predict any kind of possible failure, but small issues won't snowball into catastrophe if you have a good CI implementation. When we have decentralized decision-making, the meritocracy that we have in open source. Specifically for risk management, this means you need to push authority to people who are closest to the information. That means if you have a developer who's working on a particular technical area, if they notice there is a risk there is something failing, they should have, the authority and the power to change it. And of course, you can leverage the broader community as per, the open source spirit. And also to facilitate that, so we don't have single people working on single projects, you can create working groups for different risk areas. For example, you can have a security group or a QA group or like an infrastructure DevOps group, which is a pool of people who focus on these kind of things and they can identify and jump on different things. Then we have flexible resourcing. Just a small disclaimer here. At Collabora, we don't call people allocation resourcing, but this entails also infrastructure, tooling, hardware, anything like that. So it's like a more general term. So people allocation is a part of this. And what is very effective here is scenario planning. This is what I'm doing 60% of my time on Collabora, to imagine how different uncertainties can play out. And now what happens if this project doesn't start? What happens if we have a priority there? What if this person is not available? All these kinds of things that are very useful to prepare. And transparent communication in any business, but especially in ours, is very, very important. And I like the view of trust being a currency for resilience. It buys you time, cooperation, and forgiveness should things go south, which they can do sometimes. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is when you're working with others, both internally, with clients, and within the community, to be as transparent as you can about the challenges you're facing, the risks that you've identified, and to look at the whole group as an ecosystem in itself. So this is what the systemic thinking point is at the bottom. This is an ecosystem. We are all part of the ecosystem, the clients, the consultancies, and the open source community. We need to view it as a whole rather than being on the defense. So we've seen, the theory around risk management, around risk in open source. I want to talk a little bit more about operational resilience as an emergent property. And what do I mean by that? This is not something you just add on top. I want you to think of operational resilience kind of like a DevOps process, like CI/CD, or like security as a mindset kind of thing. It needs to be incorporated into the way that you work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that just to make it a bit clearer. So we have the 3 pillars that I created there to explain it a little bit better. The first one is agility. So we adopt adaptive planning and flexible contracts as much as we can. Then we have alignment. Obviously, we should rely on shared principles rather than rigid roadmaps. That means trying to align the client needs also with upstream priorities. Like at Collabora, we have our raison d'etre to contribute as much as possible to open source projects. So you need to make sure that you are aligned on the shared goals, priorities, and what you want to achieve. Rigid roadmaps can often be a blocker there. So you need to fit in the agility into that as well when you're planning. And of course, feedback, an integral part of communication, is very important. You need to establish continuous feedback loops across upstream, downstream, and also within your internal teams. We have learned risk-based thinking from ISO 9001. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, where it integrates risk awareness throughout the organization, and it ensures proactive learning. Are you all with me so far? Yes? Good. So let's look a little bit at traditional and more modern, let's say lightweight approaches to risk management, just on a very high level so you can understand the shift that we need to make and that we need to adapt in order to both survive and also thrive later on. So traditional risk management processes like project management methods like Prince2. I don't know if has anybody done Prince2 before? Yeah? Thick book, very dry. So how that works is you have risk registers. You have a probability impact matrix, like a heat map, if you like. mitigation plans, and essentially you follow like a process. You identify the threats, you analyze how likely is it going to happen, that it's going to happen, what's the impact if it happens, and then you plan responses. You have 4 different response options, which is avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept. This is like old school, traditional risk management protocol. Now, open source is facing risk a bit more in an emergent nature. So we need something a little bit more flexible. A more lightweight approach, which is what we call agile now, has risk control embedded in frequent deliveries and feedback loops. So you know this, like 2-week sprints, whatever you prefer in your business, deliver fast and often. In practice, how that works, you have daily stand-ups or whatever fits your business. You could do it like twice a week or whatever, but frequent check-ins, very brief. What did I do yesterday? What am I planning to do today? Am I blocked anywhere? To have a good communication within the team and to ensure that you can deliver. Backlog grooming, so important. We need to set time aside to groom our backlog, to prioritize the task, reprioritize as new things come in, so that the team knows what tasks to pick first, next, what is most important, and to be able to have a good estimation as well. Where does the project stand? Code reviews, also crucial. Many times in my careers, I heard like, upstream will take care of that. It's like, no, please, internally. It's a great learning opportunity, Have a team, work on it together, review each other's code. It's a great learning opportunity. It's great for QA, and you have less isolated work as well. And of course, automated testing and sprint retrospectives. And when I mean retrospectives, I mean like a blame-free post-mortem, not like, you did this again, you did that again, and I don't want to work with you. No, that's not productive at all. But essentially, this is a loop where, you keep learning, you feed back to it, you document it, and this way you limit the cost of failure, and you build resilience, for scope changes and things like that. So if you deliver in small patches, the client is less likely to say, actually, I don't want that anymore, like after 3 months, because they're aware of all the deliverables. One thing I want to emphasize, though, is that neither one or the other is a golden solution. As always, we need to be a bit selective. So you always need to keep an eye on maintaining situational awareness without overly bureaucratic processes. You don't want to kill productivity by having too much admin time. So, there can be macroeconomic shifts or funding changes, something like that. So you need to have your eye on a high-level picture by also, being tactically efficient. So don't just focus on the sprints, but, keep an eye on the overall picture as well. Now, theory is all good. Everybody can follow it, everybody understands it, but what does it look like in practice? What can we really do? Well, first of all, you can consider co-developing with upstream against parallel forking. I know it's not always the option the client wants, because sometimes parallel forking may appear faster, but it does create technical debt and isolation down the line. So whenever possible, this is also what we do. We would like to co-develop with upstream. Then, of course, we have the rapid redeployment of engineering talent, what I call modular backlogs. This is very important because you can cross-train engineers so that people can shift from one project to another if needed, like if an upstream project is blocked or anything else comes up that is stalling them, right? Or if there's a sudden demand in a different technical area. What we want to avoid is having too many isolated one-person expert teams. So we want to group people together and have them learn as much as they can from one another to have functional teams and thereby also modular backlogs, as I say. And of course, that ties into strategic upskilling, which is one of the areas I'm very actively involved in recently. Invest in training and also practice opportunities so that teams can handle new technologies and any compliance requirements or anything else that might come up. Continuous improvement builds resilience into the workforce. It's very important. You cannot have engineers that are stagnant for years and years and years, only working on one technical area. It's not good for them, it's not good for the business. So we need to provide training, mentoring, and opportunities to practice, very important. You can't just send people on a 2-year course to learn a new technology stack and then just leave it for 2 years and hope that they still remember. So, you can have upstream project contributions or structured it in some way. If you need some more practical tips that you can incorporate, there's a very lightweight risk management framework for consultancies, contributors, and consumers of open source, actually. And I'll explain it a little bit better. So the first step is to map uncertainty. And that can be very different for each one of you, but I'll give you some examples. So you can catalog critical upstreams, like different dependencies and unknowns using software bill of materials, SPDX files. So knowing what you depend on is the first defense against risk. So you know all what you're working on, you know what the dependencies are. Keep an eye on things and be aware of where the potential risks are. And then you can set operational triggers. You can define events that should prompt a review. That can be anything. That can be the departure of a lead maintainer, a license change, or a rapid spike in issue count. Like, for example, if a project you're working on suddenly has like thousands and thousands of issues, or a mailing list is like dead quiet. It's like, what's happening? Just have that kind of mindset. This anticipates problems rather than just reacting too late. And of course, create buffers. Any operations specialist loves buffers, including myself. You need to budget time, talent, and tools to deal with issues without derailing delivery. And this can be very challenging. We know the theory of constraints and bottlenecks. Buffers provide slack around constraints. Now I'll show you a little bit what this adaptive operational cycle. So essentially what we said, input, this is your data. It can be a heat map. So the heat map is basically showing you where the risk, like how severe is it and how likely is it to happen. Whatever works for you. It can be a list on a Post-it, whatever works for you really. But the input, the data, where you get your information from, like something is different. Sense is, to analyze that. That doesn't feel quite right. I need to look into it, analyze it. Then adapt. You react to that, what you see. You make the change, or you set up the process of a safeguard, whatever works in that particular situation. And you stabilize it, which means also you document it and make sure, a similar use case doesn't happen again. And of course, this is cyclical. It can repeat itself. But it's a good framework to keep in mind, and it's very flexible. You can adapt it really to any business process or any use case you have in your own line of work. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about OpenChain. If you're not familiar with that, it's a standardized compliance program, and that helps suppliers, integrators, and customers speak the same language, essentially, lowering the cost of trust. So we have shared expectations, which can reduce misunderstandings and like duplicate legal review and things like that. And it's also very beneficial for procurement, mergers and acquisitions, and all that, because you have everything very clearly documented. Because of the bill of materials and the license data, it's all ready. So at Collabora, we have a template-based project board where we integrate the OpenChain requirements into our delivery workflows. We have created a comprehensive process covering all our different scenarios, development scenarios that are relevant to our business, so engineers can easily pick out what fits best. We have it as a mandatory requirement for every project that starts, that we need to have a compliance checklist, and we store it. We have quarterly audits. Every 2 years, I make sure the processes are up to date. We recertify every 18 months. So this is like a very much embedded process within Collabora's operations right now. Not only is it important for onboarding new clients and having the trust of the client, because you have robust processes when it comes to license compliance. Compliance maturity also signals operational maturity, which is very important. So OpenChain conformant suppliers are obviously onboarded more quickly and deliver work with fewer legal escalations potentially. And we have seen that a lot of clients, even in the pre-sales phase, are asking about this. So it's definitely a very good thing to have. And OpenChain is both a risk reducer and an efficiency enabler, because it turns compliance into a competitive advantage rather than just an afterthought. It is embedded into checks into every project, as I mentioned, and we conduct regular trainings as well. So it's part of our day-to-day without, being something that you add on top for the last years. Now, if you would like to see, okay, how can I help? Like, what can I do to get resilience in open source, either for myself or upstream? Well, you can audit your upstream dependencies, as we mentioned, and look for blind spots. For example, hidden packages, unclear licenses, or anything like that. They are SBOM tools that can generate a complete inventory. I'm sure you know this much better than me. A lot of gadgets around. I heard machine learning is also involved now with this one, so very exciting things that can be automated there. You can define your own trigger points, as we said before, for engagement, such as a stalled project, maintainer departure, license change, or an influx of unanswered issues, anything that makes sense to you that is alarming. Build a standing upstream engagement budget that covers time, talent, tooling, and ownership. This is very important. It's also something that we do at Collabora extensively for years. So if you budget proactive contributions, that helps keep upstream healthy and reduces downstream firefighting as well, which is very important. And if you haven't, you could consider adopting OpenChain practices into your development workflow. So I would like to encourage you to take ownership of resilience planning and collaboration in your own organization. Reflect on what kind of risks you encounter in your open source projects. Are they technical? Are they organizational? Are they supply chain related? And talk to your teams about resilience planning. Make risk management a standing agenda item rather than just a postmortem exercise. This is, going back to this sense element, make it part of your day-to-day. You can consider OpenChain as part of your strategy if you would like, and to clarify development and license compliance. It does provide a structured framework for your organization and your partners. And you can explore how you can contribute to improving upstream collaboration. Supporting communities makes projects stronger and reduces risk for everybody. If you have any process-related questions, of course, I added my email as well. Feel free to connect with me if you'd like to discuss anything further. So for some final thoughts, just to conclude, by implementing all these principles, you can navigate technological, economic, and organizational uncertainty, as we said, and also maintain delivery reliability and client trust in the meantime. So you kind of need to connect both of them. You need to be strategic but pragmatic at the same time. And what does that mean? If you combine the collective intelligence and agility of open source culture with thoughtful risk techniques, from scenario planning to like the DevOps automation that we talked about, you can create an organization that doesn't just survive uncertainty, but it leverages it to evolve and excel. Embed risk management mentality into your day-to-day, as I mentioned, so you can not only mitigate bad outcomes, but also create really valuable opportunities. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? No? Yes?
I have one. Can you go back, please, to slide 14?
This one?
Yeah. So can you give us some advice what to do when we have many dependencies, like many hundreds or thousands of dependencies in a project?
Well, I always like to break it down, so it depends. Can you give me a bit more context, like an example of how that looks like?
When you have to do the OpenChain compliance
Yes.
for a project,
Yes.
there's many dependencies.
Yes.
And you have to go through all of them to identify the risks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us some advice from your experience working with OpenChain, how to filter those dependencies or how to make it more manageable?
Mm-hmm.
Going through one by one, through thousands of dependencies.
Yeah, of course. So for Aubergine specifically, you need to be able to verify the licenses of the components that you actually touch, right? That you work on. It can be, for example, you work on GStreamer or the kernel or on Mesa, this very popular use case of ours. If the dependencies that you have are under this component, then you don't need to list them all one by one. You say, okay, this is the Linux kernel. We have like hundreds of dependencies, but they're all related to that, and then you are compliant. It's part of the process that we have at Collabora. This is how we've implemented it, and we gather the artifacts of proof, like, okay, we have checked this.
And I assume you can also use something like SPDX to automate and
Yes.
like to go check all the dependencies.
Yes, we do have some projects that are also product-based, and they have regular releases, and they have these artifacts or the outputs from the SPDX files. Like they store it every week, and they have it all automated. Yes, but then most of our projects are also consultancy-based, so not product-driven. So that's a bit simpler. Like we helped build, write a few patches for that. So yeah, many different cases. That's why it took us quite a few months to create a comprehensive policy, but yeah, it's a fair point.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? No? All right, well, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference.